Hello, 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 hello. Hello, ninth period. Today, we are going to go over the slides that I posted. So I will go through each slide. I'll explain each slide as usual. Um, Everything is going smoothly, hopefully for you as well. I am going to start using something called Edpuzzle. I think you guys are probably familiar with it from other classes. So next week, I'm going to throw an Edpuzzle video in there with a couple of questions and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to mix it up a little bit next week. But we're still sticking with slides and a little something to do every day, quiz every 3 or 4, or every week. And I'm also going to throw in those Edpuzzle things as well. So I'm going to go through the slides right now. Hello, Henry. Um, it is period 9, isn't it? Anyway, I don't care. All right. So we're going through Unit 4, Lesson 8. What role do old growth forests and tree plantations have? So you have been. Look at my dog. Everybody see my dog? Oh, look at that doggy. Hello. Hello, puppy. All right. So we have been going through agriculture, and we have been going through the way farming methods were making food. We have been doing that. We talked about irrigation, and we talked about GMOs, and we talked about integrated pest management, pest control. Now we're getting into a different part where we're talking about forests. Now, agriculture doesn't just include food. We also need trees, right? The actual trees themselves. Come on, lay down, Lex. We actually have we need the trees themselves for wood, for timber, for construction, right? So that's a very, very important thing that we have to do. So this whole old growth forest and tree plantation lecture sort of talks about uh, how we provide the wood that we need for timber and for construction and stuff like that. So I am on the slides, and you should be too. And you should be going to slide 2, which is which is an agenda slide as usual. So you can look at that at your leisure. And then you can go to slide 3, which is a review on integrated pest management, IPM. We did that last lecture, and you guys already quizzed on it. So if you were still shady on it, you can check it out again with this review. Slide 4 is also a review for integrated pest management. It was just a continuation from slide 3. So then we get to slide 5, and that's the objective. And there are a couple of important links on here as well. So you will see that the objective today is to explain the significance and value of old growth forests, right? Also to be able to explain the role of tree plantations in forestry. All right, so we're going to learn about old growth forests. We're going to learn about tree plantations. So there are 2 intro videos, which I highly suggest you watch on your own time. They're only 2 or 3 minutes each. The first one is about old growth forests, gives you a really, really, really good idea of what an old growth forest is and isn't, and some things that happen in an old growth forest. So it's very important to watch that. I think it's 3 minutes max. Very, very informational. So if we go through this and you still don't understand what I'm saying about old growth forests, definitely check that video out. Then there's also a video on the world's tallest trees, which is very, very cool just to see the sheer size of them. And we're going to look at a couple slides now that show you the trees. So if you go to slide 6, you'll see that there's a tree called the president, and it is a tree that is 250 feet high, right? There are trees out there that are 200 plus feet high. That is enormous. It took 126 frames to properly capture this tree. As far as photographs go, right? It's more than 3,000 years old. So it's a very resilient, obvious tree. So they're the largest things, the largest, oldest things in our country and the world are trees. So when you look at the president here, and you can see the rest of the next few slides say, can you spot the climbers, right? So you can see the guy on slide 6 in the orange jacket at the base of this tree, and it's just enormous. And these trees, we don't see this type of tree by us on the East Coast, but you will see a lot of this type of tree in the Pacific Northwest, the northern part of California, the redwood forest. Redwood trees grow this large. Great giant sequoias grow this large. I mean, it's amazing. I've never seen them. I've never been out there, and hopefully I'm going to be able to get out there in the next couple of years on vacation and check this out because it's just amazing. I know that back in the 50s, I always see this picture, and you can Google it if you want. They took, I think it was in the redwood forest, they actually, the tree was so wide, the trunk is so wide, they actually cut a bridge in it, a big arching bridge, and there's a road that goes through it, and you can actually drive your car through this trunk of the tree. That's how big it is. So it's really amazing how big these things can get. Slide 7 is just another picture of that tree a little bit higher, and it says, can you spot the climber? You guys can look around for the climber there. Slide 8, a little bit higher in that tree in the president. If you want to look for that climber and see if you can spot them, that's fine. Slide 9 has the picture of the top of the tree, and you can see the climber clearly in the middle there with his orange jacket on. So that's pretty cool. Slide 10 shows you the entire tree and just reiterates what it said in the beginning there, that this thing is 250 foot tall. It's 3,000 years old. There are trees this large, and to me, that is just amazing. But okay, slide 11. Slide 11 is a timeline of a forest, of the succession or the stages of a forest, right? So you see in year 1, you have a lot of grasses and small shrubs and herbs growing in the dirt, right? And that happens for about, from year 0 to about year 15. Around year 15, you'll start seeing saplings growing. Those are baby trees, right? You can see in that picture there, the trees have a very, very small diameter. They're called saplings, and you'll see bushes and shrubs. You'll see that for another 15 years, another 30, and then around 60 years, you get to what they describe as a young forest. And these trees, you can see, are much more mature. They're larger. About 100 years, you have a mature forest. And then anything over 200 years old, they consider an old growth forest. So from 200 years up to however long it's been there, 3,000 years, that is considered an old growth forest. Now, what you have to understand, and this is what can get confusing, is just because it's an old growth forest and it's been there for 200 years or 500 years or 700 years, doesn't mean that everything in it is old. Right? It doesn't mean when you walk into an old growth forest, you're surrounded by 3,000-year-old things. There are things that are that as old as that forest. There are trees that are super, super old and 700 years, but there's also a lot of new things in an old growth forest too. And why is that? That's because things die, things regrow, things are eaten by animals, things regrow, things are decimated by fire, and they regrow, right? So it doesn't mean that this forest is dead. This forest is just old and dead, and nothing else grows there. It just means that it has been there so long that there are trees that are really, really, really old there, right? So that's what an old growth forest is. That video clip in the objective really explains it well. So I want you to go back and watch that 3-minute video clip when you get a chance. So that's the succession or the stages to get to an old growth forest. An old growth forest is considered to be 200 years old or older. All right. Slide 12 is something that you're doing. So if you see in the speaker notes, it says link a picture of an old growth ecosystem here. So go search yourself on images of old growth ecosystems and plop a link or two in the speaker notes at the bottom. Slide 13 is also a you do slide. That is to find a map of old growth forests. So what that means is either you can find a map, a worldwide map, Google it, see what you can find. You can get a worldwide map of where old growth forests are located. You can just focus on the United States. You can focus on a different South America. You can focus wherever you want, and just give me a map, a link to a map of something showing an old growth forest. Okay, like, oh, old growth forests are up here or over here, over here. So that's what I want to see in that one. So the first one is a picture, right? A picture of an old growth ecosystem. The second one is a map of old growth forest locations. All right. Slide 14. So you have your old growth forests. You have your forests that have been here for 200, 500, 700, 2,000 years, however long they've been here. When one gets cut, now that means either literally cut down or when it burns down, right? Because that does happen as well. When an old growth forest gets taken out, right, it goes away, but after it's gone, it can go through those stages of forest succession again, right? We talked about that about a month ago. We talked about secondary succession, primary and secondary succession. So secondary succession is when you had something, it gets wiped out, and then it regrows over time. Well, that's what happens with old growth forests, because that's what happens with everything. So with old growth forests, if they're cut or taken out by fire, they will eventually, in 200, 400 years, become another old growth forest, right? A section of old growth forest. But it takes that long. And the point there is old growth forests have a lot of very usable timber, very usable wood for construction and for things like that. Okay. So you have to keep that in mind when we're talking about all this, because what we're really thinking about when we're talking about old growth forests is these big, huge trees that make a lot of wood for us. So when they get taken down, whether we cut them down to use them, you're sitting around and you got to wait another 200-300 years for this natural succession to take place in order to get these mature trees to cut down and all this other stuff. And that's not very sustainable, right? You can't, that's not a recyclable, reusable thing if it's taking that long. So alternatively, what they do is they can go into an old growth forest and they can say, okay, all of these trees are very mature. These trees are good wood. These trees are the wood that we need and we desire for cutting and for using as lumber and construction and everything like that. So we're going to take the seeds from these trees and we're going to replant them, right? So now you can have these things that they call tree plantations, which I've always heard of as tree farms, but they call them plantations, and I think that just means it's a larger area than just a tree farm. And you see this with Christmas trees. They will have tree farms where they grow Christmas trees, and when they're big enough to cut and put in your house for Christmas, then they cut them down and they sell them, and then they grow more on their land. And if you go to a Christmas tree farm, you'll see there are always these Christmas trees in different stages of growth. There's some that are almost done, and there's some that are babies. And so they're constantly growing these trees in a recyclable manner so they can cut them down. Well, it's the same thing for old growth wood and these mature trees that make really good lumber for us. They can seed a huge area, a tree plantation, and they can grow these trees and then recut them when they're mature enough for timber. And they can have a bunch, it depends how big the area is. In these tree plantations, the area is enormous. You can have trees in different stages, right? So you can have trees that are almost mature and ready to be cut. You can have ones that are planted and are almost and all the way down to babies and seedlings and all that stuff. So you can always have this supply rotating. Instead of waiting 200 years for nature to do it yourself, you could just get the desired trees, plant them yourself, and sort of start this recyclable type of thing, right? It's almost like a tree cycle. It's not, but I think water cycle, nitrogen cycle, carbon cycle, it's almost like a tree cycle because you're growing them, you're cutting them down, using them, you're growing them, and it's kind of an interesting concept. Slide 15 says that tree plantations, they're neither good nor bad, right? They're sort of neutral in what they are. When you're growing all these trees, you are taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. You're helping with oxygen production, so you can't call it a bad thing, right? And there are some reasons why it wouldn't be a good thing either. So they're very neutral. They're okay. It's a good idea. The problem with tree plantations is the bottom line, and what this slide is sort of talking about. They take up a lot of space. They take up a lot of space. You'll see on the next slide. So a tree plantation where they're growing these trees for cutting and all this other stuff, the land that they're using can't be used for anything else, right? So if they're using millions and millions and millions of acres of land to grow trees, which is a good thing, you can't use that land for farming, so that could be an economic issue, right? And here's something weird with old growth forests. In a natural old growth forest, you have trees growing, and you have smaller trees, and you have different levels of trees, and the top of the tree we call the canopy, right? The canopy is the big part of the tree with all the leaves and the branches. So you have varying levels of canopy. That's important because sunlight can penetrate through the canopy and hit the ground. And sunlight is needed on the ground of forests, so shrubs grow and berries grow and things for the animals and all that other stuff, right? So when a tree plantation is planted, there's large areas where the canopy isn't level. It's all level. It's not out of level. So all the trees are basically the same height in a large area. Now, like I said, you could have trees that are almost done, trees that are halfway done, trees that are babies, but they don't stagger them in the same place. So you may have 500 acres of trees that are all the same height. What that does is that makes the canopy so thick that the sun can't get down through it, and then the sun can't reach the ground, and there's not a lot of growth of shrubs and berries and food for animals on the floor of the forest. So therefore, it's not a great environmental thing because animals don't typically stay where they can't eat. So they can get pushed out. So it could be an environmental problem if you're not careful with how you're growing these trees on a tree plantation. All right. So the large space that it takes could be an issue. But again, the more trees, the better it is for the atmosphere. So it's a give or take. Slide 16 shows you that there are a lot on a national level. There are places like Chile, there are places like Brazil, there are places like South Africa, Indonesia, millions and millions and millions of hectares. And we said a hectare is like a couple soccer fields. It's a lot, right? So think about millions and millions and millions of acres of trees that have been planted to grow, to harvest, and all this stuff, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing. But the biggest problem with tree plantations, which this talks about all down the side here, is that um, I see a couple words jumping out at me. In that first bullet point, uniformity is jumping out at me. In that second bullet point, monocultures is jumping out at me. And in that third bullet point, the word biodiversity is jumping out at me. So here's the problem. These trees that are seeded and are grown and are good wood trees and are used on these tree plantations, they're very uniform. They are a monoculture. We talked about that a few weeks ago, monoculture versus polyculture, right? A monoculture is when one type of genetic thing is growing in an area. Uh, I think it's the example. I was across the street at the church, and I think it as the example I used yellow flowers and purple flowers. And I said if there were only yellow flowers, like a monoculture of just yellow flowers, and that's what the bees ate, and something came in and destroyed the yellow flowers, there'd be no more food for the bees. But because there was biodiversity across the street, there was yellow flowers and purple flowers. They were different species. So if the yellow flowers got taken out of by a disease, maybe the purple flowers survive that pest or disease and can still provide food for the bees. So biodiversity is important for survival. When you're making these tree plantations and you're growing this good wood, you're growing a monoculture of millions and millions and millions of acres of this tree. So that means it's very susceptible to pests and diseases. If a disease comes in that destroys this type of tree, it's going to destroy millions and millions. There's no biodiversity in tree plantations. So that could be a very, very problematic thing if pests and diseases are introduced and not taken care of quickly enough. So that's the biggest tick with a tree plantation. Again, they're good because they help the atmosphere. Yeah, they take up a lot of space. That kind of neutralizes itself out. But the fact that they're monocultures is dangerous because you could use all this space up and also, have all this stuff decimated by a pest or a disease because there's no biodiversity in a forest like this. There's also a problem with the soil. So back to what I was saying about sunlight not penetrating. If sunlight's not penetrating and things aren't growing on the ground, that means things aren't dying on the ground, right? When you have a natural forest or you have anything, you see trees falling off the ground, leaves falling off the ground, sorry. You see them decomposing and moving into the soil. All of that dead stuff, that dead plant material, adds nutrients to the soil. So if you don't have a lot of stuff growing on the forest floor because you don't have sun penetrating, you don't have a lot of stuff dying seasonally, so you don't have a lot of nutrients being recycled in the soil. So your soil can run out of important nutrients, and that can also damage the tree growth, stunt the tree growth, or hurt the trees in a catastrophic way. So there's a couple things with tree plantations that could be an issue if you're not careful with how you plant. And they're more cognizant of it now. They plant in different ways. They stagger, so the canopies are staggered. They'll cut some of the holes in the canopies so there's more sunlight on the ground. So there's ways to remedy that, but if you're thinking millions and millions and millions of acres, that's a big project. So they're definitely a conundrum, whether they're good or whether they're not or whatever. All right, so when we move to slide 17, this is part of what you have going on today. So you are watching those two videos and the objective, they're only a couple minutes. There are those two slides where you need to show me a picture of an ecosystem. And then there's another one showing me maps of old growth forests, right, where they're located. So there's two things within the slides that you have to do. And then there's this. There is a video, and this video is going to be watched sporadically through the next couple of slideshows. So this is the first part of it that you're going to watch today. Just watch the first 16 minutes. It's called Survivors of the Firestorm. You're going to watch from minute 0 to minute 16. After the link is right there in the speaker notes. After you watch those 16 minutes, you're going to look at slide 18. Slide 18 gives you a question. The question is about something called Black Saturday, which is explained in the video. So you are going to answer this question, not just with a couple words. Give me a couple sentences. Give me a meaty answer. You're going to give me a nice meaty answer right in the speaker notes. All right. So everything you're doing today is being done right in this slide presentation. So you can turn this in when you're done. You are answering question 18 after you watch the video, which is linked there. You're putting those couple of links in those slides up top where it asks you for maps and diagrams. And then you are also looking at those two videos at the beginning. That is what I got going on here. So that's everything sort of about an old growth forest. Now, after this, just to give you a heads up, you turn this stuff in. The next time I assign something to you, which is, what is that, Tuesday or Wednesday? I forgot what it is. I think it's Wednesday. No, Tuesday. Whenever it is. Whenever I assign something else to you guys, ninth period, the next thing we're going to be doing is the Edpuzzle stuff. So just in case you don't know what an Edpuzzle is, maybe I'll throw up a tutorial and show you what Edpuzzle is. And I'll have a video for you, a 4 or 5 minute video for you about old growth forest, and there'll be questions along the way, and I'll sort of count that as a graded assessment, and that'll be easy enough for you to do. All right, well, I'm going to get out of here. You still got a half hour, so get through the slides, watch that 16-minute video, and answer the question. All right, see you soon. Stay safe.